The snow had no malice. It simply fell as soft as ashes, slow as time, blanketing the earth in silence that made Naomi's breath feel like a crime. Her footprints behind her were the only proof she'd belonged anywhere at all. Wind needled through her thin summer dress, the hem torn, her boots gone, left by the porch where her sister-in-law had thrown them. "You got no right to stay," Lydia had said, chin lifted, arms folded tight over a belly full of someone else's child. "You've had years to find a man. It's not my job to feed you too." Naomi hadn't replied. Her brother Caleb hadn't looked at her. Just rubbed the bridge of his nose like she was a headache passing through. That was what hurt most, not the snow now crusting her hair, not the hunger burning dull in her belly, but the way his hand had rested on Lydia's shoulder and not hers. She had always tried not to be a burden. She had sewn and swept, kept quiet, sang lullabies to Caleb's daughters until her voice cracked, but in the end, she'd been cast off like bad cloth. The road was a ribbon of white now, winding past fences splintered with age, trees bare and accusing. Naomi walked with her arms crossed tight, clutching the bundle she'd managed to grab: a shawl, a Bible, and a comb. That was all. That, and her name. Somewhere in the low distance, coyotes howled. It should have frightened her. It didn't. What more could they take? The sky grayed to the color of pewter, and the snow thickened, kissing her lashes, her lips. Her dress, pale yellow once, was soaked through, clinging to her legs. She kept walking. She did not know exactly where he lived, only that stories said he dwelled past Red Clay Ridge, where the canyons grew deep and the pines thick. They called him the Ghost Bear. The shirtless Apache. The man who once saved a wagon of children from drowning but vanished before the town could thank him. Women whispered about his body. Men feared his silence. But Naomi had nothing left to lose. By the time she reached the trail that bent toward the canyon, her lips were blue. Her legs trembled. Each breath scraped like gravel. The snow reached her knees now. She stumbled once, twice, then fell, her palms sinking into the drift. "Lord," she whispered, voice hoarse, "just don't let me freeze ugly." That was the last prayer she managed. A flicker of warmth woke her. Not heat, but light. Firelight. The world moved beneath her, no, not the world, arms. Strong ones. She opened her eyes and saw a bare chest like carved stone, glistening with snowmelt. A braid swung past her vision. Her head rested against warm skin that smelled of pine and sweat and leather. She blinked. He didn't speak. He carried her like a man carries something precious, not heavy. Just important. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of smoke and cedar. She felt the warmth rush her cheeks, felt the sting return to her fingers as he knelt, placing her beside the fire. He took a buffalo hide and wrapped it around her gently, like swaddling a newborn. Still, no words. She shivered harder now, the cold leaving her in little painful bursts. Her hands trembled as she looked up at him. He knelt across the hearth, his eyes dark and unreadable. He had the stillness of an animal who had long since learned not to explain himself. "I didn't mean to bother," she rasped. I didn't know where else to go." The man said nothing. His face was not unkind. Only quiet. Naomi looked down at the buffalo hide, then at the fire crackling low between them. "I'm Naomi," she offered. The silence stretched, long and slow like honey. Then finally, his voice, deep, measured, cut the hush like a blade through canvas. "Talon." She nodded. Her mouth trembled as if his name had broken something loose in her chest. A breath. A sob. She swallowed it. "I'll leave come morning. I swear it." Talon's eyes flicked to the window. Snow clawed against the panes. The wind moaned low, like a woman mourning. He stood. She thought he might open the door and gesture her out. But instead, he stoked the fire higher. Then he walked to a wooden shelf and took down a clay cup. He filled it from a kettle, steam curling up like prayer smoke, and handed it to her. Naomi took it with both hands. The warmth burned through the chill. "I don't know what folks say about me," she whispered, staring into the drink. "But most of it's true. She hadn't meant to say that. He said nothing. Just sat beside her again, a respectful space between them. He didn't press. Didn't pry. That silence, it steadied her more than any words would have. I'm not bad, she added, like a child explaining a broken toy. Just, been too quiet too long. Talon stirred. She thought he might finally speak again. Instead, he rose, crossed to a trunk, and drew out a dry shirt. He placed it beside her on the quilt without meeting her eyes. Then he walked to the far side of the room, where he laid a rolled-up blanket beside the door and lay down, facing the wall. Naomi watched the fire dance. Outside, the storm grew louder. But inside, stillness. She curled beneath the hide, cradling the mug, eyes blinking slow. A man who didn't ask. A fire that didn't judge. A silence that didn't punish. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, slept without shame. Morning broke soft and silver. The snow still fell, but gentler now, like forgiveness. Naomi woke to the sound of wood splitting. She rose, blanket around her shoulders, and peered out. Talon stood shirtless again, steam rising from his skin as he split logs with smooth, practiced grace. His breath came in slow clouds. His face was unreadable, not cold, just remote, like a cliff. She opened the door. Just an inch. I'll be gone by noon, she said, voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Talon didn't look up. No rush. Just that. 2 words. And they unraveled something in her. Not because they gave her permission, but because they gave her time. She closed the door slowly and stood there, palms pressed to the wood. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But for today. She wasn't cold. And she wasn't alone. The next morning came quiet, wrapped in frost and slow-moving mist. Naomi awoke to the scent of firewood and something faintly spiced, rosemary or sage maybe, blending with the soft murmur of boiling water. For a long moment, she lay still beneath the quilt, eyes fixed on the pine beams above her, listening to the rhythm of a world that didn't expect anything of her. No voices. No footfalls stomping downstairs. No children tugging at her hem. No Lydia telling her, it's past time you earned your keep. Only warmth. And silence. She sat up slowly, the hide slipping off her shoulders. Her body ached, not from cold, not now, but from remembering too much in too little time. She swung her feet to the floor, and the wood was warm beneath her soles. Someone had laid stones beneath the hearth, cleverly spread, to keep the heat traveling. Another quiet kindness she hadn't asked for. Talon stood at the stove, back turned. The fire cast a golden light across his skin, turning the sinew of his arms into something almost sculpted. He moved with calm purpose, spooning oats into a pot like it was a task worth reverence. He hadn't noticed her yet. Or maybe he had. She wasn't sure with him. I can help, she offered. He didn't startle. Just turned slightly and nodded once, stepping aside. She took the spoon from his hand and stirred. The oats thickened slowly. Her fingers brushed his when she reached for the salt. He didn't pull away. I don't take charity, she said, gently. I can earn my keep. Talon didn't answer, but he handed her a small tin of honey. Not dismissive. Not accepting. Just allowing. They ate in silence. 2 bowls. 2 spoons. A single thread of steam curling between them. Afterward, she washed dishes in a wooden basin, sleeves rolled high. Talon fetched water without being asked. When she spilled a little, he didn't laugh or flinch. Just handed her a cloth. The day passed like that. Wordless. When she swept the corners of the cabin, he handed her a nail to tack the edge of the rug. When she tried to carry firewood, he let her until the bundle overweighed her arms. Then he took it without comment, as if it had been his plan all along. By dusk, her body was warm from motion, and her heart from something stranger. Not affection, not yet. Just the first taste of worth in a long time. They sat on the porch that night, the sky awash in silver gray clouds. A thin wind stirred the trees, and somewhere far off, a hawk called. Naomi wrapped herself in the buffalo hide and sipped from a mug he'd given her. The drink was earthy roasted chicory and something bitter underneath. Talon didn't speak. He just watched the land like it belonged to his blood. I used to love the sound of snow, Naomi said, voice soft. Before it meant hunger. Talon tilted his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement. My brother and I, we were close, once. After Ma died, I raised him near as much as Pa did. But when Lydia came, well, she brought her own opinions. She waited for judgment. None came. She said I was a burden. That it looked wrong, me unmarried, still in their house. Her voice cracked. She swallowed it down. I stayed too long. Hoped too much. Didn't leave when I still had pride. Still, Talon said nothing. He only stood and walked to the edge of the porch. His silhouette framed against the dusk like something carved from bone and history. He looked back at her then only once and walked down the 3 wooden steps to the side of the house. She followed. Behind the cabin was a small shed. He opened it, revealing a modest workbench, a few hunting traps, and tools hung with reverence. He pointed to a shelf. Herbs. Seeds. Dried corn. Tools. Then he turned, and with deliberate calm, handed her a small axe. Naomi took it with both hands. Heavy. Balanced. You're offering work, she asked, brow raised. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Just turned to the log stacked nearby and split one in a single clean motion. Naomi watched the pieces fall apart like truth. The next few days slipped by like beads on a string. She helped split kindling, tied bundles of sage, stitched a torn curtain, and prepared cornbread with thick molasses. In the evenings, they sat across from one another, hands occupied with small tasks, sharpening knives, fixing moccasins, sorting seeds. No chatter. Just shared presence. And still, he hadn't asked her story again. In town, men would ask you who your father was before they asked your name. In town, the women would smile to your face and slash you to ribbons in the same breath. But Talon, he built the fire higher when she shivered. He moved the basin closer when she knelt to wash. He passed her a sharper needle when hers broke. All without words. On the 4th morning, she stepped out early, apron tied snug, hair braided over one shoulder. She found him standing barefoot at the creek, shirtless as ever, hair loose and wild. His back was to her, arms lifted to the sky. The morning light painted his skin golden bronze, and Naomi froze, not from desire, though something stirred, but from awe. He moved like a prayer. Like grief turned into discipline. She didn't speak. She only watched. Until he turned, and their eyes met across the frost-kissed grass. Neither looked away. That evening, a hawk feather appeared on her pillow. She never saw him place it there. Naomi held it to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't answer from the other room. He didn't need to. The next time she rode into town, it was with a basket of eggs and a straight spine. Talon had lent her his old horse, quiet and obedient. She wore a clean dress and the feather pinned to her braid. Mrs. Delia Crocker stared too long when Naomi walked past the general store. "That's her," she heard someone mutter. "The one living with him." Naomi didn't flinch. Inside the store, the clerk took her money like it burned. On the way back, a group of boys threw a snowball that missed her head by inches. She didn't tell Talon. That night, she made stew and set the table for 2. He sat across from her, that same still gaze as always. "I went to town," she said. They talked. Talon sipped his broth. "I don't care," she added. He looked up. Held her gaze. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite pride. Not quite sadness. Just recognition. Outside, snow fell again. Slow. Gentle. Inside, the fire rose higher. And Naomi sat beside it, her fingers warming, her voice steadying. He hadn't asked for her story. But somehow, she was finally beginning to live it. The wind carried whispers even where it couldn't carry men. By the third week, Naomi's name had grown heavier than her own body. Heavier than the basket of eggs she brought back from Talon's coop. Heavier than the silence between them, which had become something tender and familiar. She could feel it in town before she even stepped off the horse, a stiffening of shoulders, a half-second pause in chatter, the way boots scuffed the floor when she passed through the mercantile door. The gossip had bloomed. They called her a shameful thing now. Not by name, of course. But the words hung in the air like smoke. That woman. The one up in Apache Hollow. Heard she sleeps in his bed. Delia Crocker stood by the bolts of cloth, smoothing her gloves slow, like a snake deciding when to strike. I always thought some girls preferred wild things, Delia said too casually. No church. No vows. Just wind and skin. Naomi didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the sack of flour in her hands and the coins in her palm. Her dress, though clean and stitched with care, felt like it clung wrong now, too tight across the chest, too loose at the shoulders, like she was wearing someone else's name. She paid. No thank you was returned. Outside, children gawked at her from behind the wheelbarrow. One mimed a kiss and spat in the dirt. Naomi walked away with her jaw set and her eyes dry. That night, she didn't tell Talon what had been said. He didn't ask. But as she poured water into the basin and washed her hands, she noticed he was watching her from across the table, his gaze low and steady, like he'd felt the shift in the wind. They think she trailed off. They think I've no shame. Talon looked at her as though her words didn't make sense. I carry a man's water. Chop his wood. So his shirts, she said, voice taut. And they think I do it for the price of a bed. He stood and walked to the hearth, placing another log on the fire. The light rose, gold and wavering, wrapping around him like it knew he didn't ask for anything, yet gave all the same. Naomi wiped her hands and turned toward him. I don't care what they think. But it's not nothing. I came here with no name left but my own, and they're trying to strip that too. He was quiet for a long while. Then finally, you want to leave? The question came low, level. But behind it, hurt, cautious and coiled like an animal bracing for the lash. She crossed the room and stood before him, arms limp at her sides. No, she said. But I need to stand in the sun and not be spat on. Talon nodded once, slowly. Then he reached for his coat, a thick buffalo-hide thing that hung like a warrior's armor, and walked past her, out into the cold. She didn't follow. Not then. She let him be. The next morning, she rose early, dressed in her neatest skirt, and brushed out her hair until it shone. She braided the hawk feather back into place, not to look pretty, but to feel like herself. Talon was already outside. Shirtless again, steam rising from his shoulders as he repaired a fence post in the snow. I'm going back into town, she called. He looked up. His breath ghosted in the cold. You want me to ride with you? Naomi shook her head. No. This one's mine. The town seemed smaller this time. Less a place, more a cluster of judgment wrapped in clabbered in frost. At the church steps, Pastor Hargrove offered a wary nod. Miss Larkspur. Pastor. Delia Crocker stood across the way, arranging baked goods on a table for the church auction. Her smile was sweet as mold. Would you like a scone, Naomi? I made too many. Naomi approached slowly. She stopped just short of the table and placed her basket of dried herbs and teas beside Delia's pies. I'll trade, she said calmly. Sage for your cinnamon. Delia's eyes narrowed. Not sure there's a market for wild-picked weeds. Naomi leaned in slightly, voice soft but sure. I think your pastor disagrees. He used mine in his cough tonic last month. The silence rippled. Two other women glanced over. Naomi met Delia's gaze, then smiled, not cruelly, not proudly. Just enough to remind her she had not broken. She sold out her basket by noon. Left the table with empty hands and a spine like iron. That evening, she returned to the cabin and found Talon sitting on the porch, legs stretched long, knife in hand, whittling down a crooked piece of wood. She sat beside him and leaned into his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Just kept carving. "They don't know me," she murmured. "They don't want to. But I remembered something today." Talon tilted his head slightly. "I remembered I don't need permission to exist." He passed her the carved figure, a small horse, rough but graceful. She turned it over in her hands, eyes shining. "You carved this for me?" He shrugged. "Something to carry in your pocket. For when they talk." Naomi blinked hard, then reached down and took his hand. Held it. Just that. Talon didn't move away. His fingers tightened once around hers. That night, she set the carved horse beside her bed. And when she lay beneath the quilt, she did not cry. She did not dream of doors closing. Only of open fields and a man who listened with his silences and stood between her and the world without needing to be asked. The fire burned steady. The wind outside turned. But inside, something stronger held. And Naomi Larkspur, shameful in the eyes of those who never knew grace, slept like a woman finally free. The moon rose low and bronze, casting a quiet sheen over the pinewoods and broken ridgelines. It was the kind of night that held its breath. Naomi stood at the edge of Talon's porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching the trees sway in the hush. Smoke curled from the chimney, blending into the stars like a forgotten prayer. Talon was out tracking something large and careful. He'd left hours ago with only his bow and a long knife strapped to his back, leaving behind the scent of leather and tobacco and the last wordless glance that always lingered longer than it should. Naomi didn't worry, not in the way women were told to. Talon moved like someone the world didn't dare swallow. What unsettled her tonight was something else, an itch between her shoulders, the kind of stillness that warned animals before the wind even changed. She'd started locking the cabin door, even though he never did. Town gossip had grown sharper since the church auction. Someone had carved "Whore of the Hollow" into the back of her saddlebag. She hadn't told Talon, just scrubbed it clean and set the strap to face inward. Tonight, she should have barred the door. But she didn't. She turned from the porch to fetch more firewood when the floorboard groaned behind her. Before she could turn fully, a hand clamped over her mouth. The smell hit first sour whiskey and mud and then the cold kiss of metal at her throat. "Don't scream," the voice slurred. "Don't even breathe loud." She froze. Not because he said so, but because she'd smelled fear before, and this man reeked of it, desperate, cornered fear with violence behind it. The second man came around front, thinner, eyes like wet stones, face twisted with something that had nothing to do with her. "Where's the Injun?" he spat. "Heard you been shacked up with him. Heard he don't wear shirts. Heard he don't speak unless he's killing something." Naomi didn't answer. Couldn't. The knife pressed harder under her jaw. Her pulse throbbed against the blade's edge. "She's prettier than they said," the thinner man muttered, stepping closer. "Bet you got him wrapped around that little settler mouth of yours." The one behind her breathed hot and rank against her ear. "Ain't right. You settler girls forget who you belong to." She twisted suddenly, instinct rising fast, but the man yanked her backward, and the knife bit shallow into her neck. She whimpered. Not in fear. In fury. The thinner man moved to grab her dress, rough fingers curling over her sleeve, when a sound broke the stillness. A low crunch of snow. They all froze. And then, stillness split wide open. Talon stood at the tree-lean, bathed in moonlight. Shirtless. Barefoot. His braid down his back. His knife in one hand. A fresh cut on his shoulder bled slowly, shining like ink. He said nothing. He walked forward like death hadn't caught up yet. The thin one reached for his gun. He barely cleared the leather. Talon moved. No scream. No speech. Just motion, silent, brutal, efficient. His knife met the gunman's forearm with a sickening crunch, and the man dropped like a rag stuffed with sand. Naomi gasped as the one behind her pressed the blade harder in panic. "Don't!" But Talon didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on Naomi's. His hand lifted. The sound that followed was not loud, but final. The handle of Talon's tomahawk struck the attacker's temple. Naomi stumbled forward as the man dropped like felled timber. She caught herself on her knees, palms scraped. Then stillness again. The snow fell softly now. It hadn't stopped. Naomi's breath came shallow and fast. Talon stood over them both, nostrils flared, chest heaving. She looked up at him from the ground, shaking, blood at her collarbone, hair half torn from its braid, and saw no rage. Only sorrow. He knelt beside her, his voice low, rough as a drum's murmur. "They touch you?" She shook her head. "They didn't, not like that." He reached forward, hands careful. He lifted her braid, smoothing it gently back over her shoulder. Then he looked at the cut just above the clavicle. A shallow slice. Nothing life-threatening. But it bled more than it should. "I'm sorry," he said. Not because he failed. Because she had been made to fear in his house. Naomi reached for his wrist. Held it. "You came," she whispered. "I always will." The snow softened into rain, almost indistinguishable at first. The night shifted. The trees bent in reverence. They stayed there a long time, him crouched, her sitting on her heels, their breath mingling in the dark. Naomi looked at the men unconscious, broken, bruised. "I should feel bad," she said. "But I don't." "You shouldn't." She touched the side of his face. "You didn't hesitate." Talon's jaw flexed. "They were going to take something from you." Her hand remained on his cheek. His skin was cold now, but the muscle beneath was hot, alive. "You know what I gave you?" she asked. He said nothing. "My trust." Talon closed his eyes. She leaned forward and kissed the edge of his jaw, not romantic. Not urgent. Just real. A gesture of choice. They sat in the dark while the storm finished its passing. In the distance, a wolf howled. But Naomi was no longer prey. And she was not alone. The rain came steady for 3 days. Not a storm, not a flood, just a patient, unyielding wash from the sky that soaked the trees, softened the dirt paths, and painted the cabin roof in glistening gray. It tapped on the windows like fingers reminding them they were still alive. Inside, the fire burned slow and tall. Naomi knelt before it, quilt wrapped around her shoulders, nursing a shallow cup of chicory and honey. The cut at her collarbone had scabbed over, a thin red whisper against her skin, but her breath no longer hitched when she touched it. Talon sat in the far corner, sharpening a blade with long, measured strokes. Not because it needed it, but because hands needed something to do when the heart held more than it could say. Neither had spoken much since that night. Not because there was nothing left, but because words might break what they'd built in silence. The knife at her throat had not killed her. But it had changed her. And him. She looked up at him now, the flicker of fire playing across his face. His brow was furrowed, not in anger, but in thought. He looked like a man remembering something too important to speak aloud. Naomi set down the cup. "Will they come back?" Talon didn't pause his work. "No. Men like that only try once." A beat passed between them. "Do you believe me when I say I'd still be here, even if you hadn't come that night?" He looked up then. Straight at her. "Yes." She stood and crossed to him, slow but certain. Rain thrummed against the roof above them like 1,000 hooves riding across heaven. When she knelt beside him, she reached for his hand, calloused and inked with old stories she couldn't read. "Then I need you to believe something else," she said, voice low. Talon's gaze held hers. Steady. Unblinking. She placed his hand over her heart, warm beneath the quilt. "I don't stay here because I'm shamed out of town. I stay here because this is the first place I've ever been seen. Not talked about. Seen." He didn't answer. He just rested his forehead to hers. A gesture as old as soil, as sacred as breath. That night, she didn't sleep in the corner bed by the stove. She lay beside him, clothed in quiet, her fingers laced with his under the covers, and their breathing rose and fell like tides that had finally found the same moon. The next morning, a letter arrived, brought by Ansel Reed himself, the old man riding slow up the hill with a shawl over his shoulders and a cigar clenched between his teeth. Naomi met him at the porch. "Figured you oughta know," he said. "Sheriff rounded up them boys. Drunk, bruised, and mean as muleflies. Claimed you lured Em out for Apache revenge." Naomi didn't flinch. Ansel squinted at her. "Sheriff didn't believe Em. And neither do most folks. Words got around what really happened." She crossed her arms, calm but firm. "And what do they say now?" "They say he should have killed Em both," Ansel said. "They say you've got a man worth his weight in blood. And some say, maybe they judged you too quick." Naomi nodded once. "And what do you say?" Ansel leaned closer. "I say it's about damn time someone earned his peace. And I reckon you helped him find it." He tipped his hat to her, then to Talon, who stood barefoot in the doorway, arms crossed, silent as ever. As Ansel rode off, Naomi turned to Talon. "That sound like redemption to you?" Talon shrugged. "Sounds like we're left alone." She laughed, a rich sound that melted into the trees. They spent the day stacking wood, mending chicken wire, fixing the fence where the drunk had fallen through. Naomi moved with purpose, sleeves rolled high, hair braided tight. She was no longer a guest. No longer a woman asking for shelter. She was home. At dusk, she stood in the doorway, watching rain blur the horizon. Talon stepped up behind her, and she leaned back into him without needing to be asked. "Do you ever think about naming this place?" she asked. He considered a moment. "Haven't had cause." She smiled. "Maybe it doesn't need one. Maybe it just needs to be remembered." He slipped his arm around her waist. She rested her hands over his. "Talon," she asked softly. "M.M.? If I called you mine, would you let me mean it?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. She felt his breath against her neck, warm and thoughtful. "You already do," he said at last. She turned to face him fully, the firelight behind her painting him in gold. Her fingers rested against his chest. "And if I took your name?" He stilled. "I don't need a ring," she said. "But I need to belong to something that won't throw me out when I stop being convenient." Talon's hands rose, one cradling her jaw, the other settling over her shoulder. "You already belong," he whispered. She leaned in, forehead against his again. "Then tell me what they never did. Say my name, like it matters." He whispered it. Not like an answer, but a vow. That night, under firelight and falling rain, Naomi Larkspur gave him her heart without ceremony. No preacher. No witnesses. Just her word. And the next morning, when the sun rose gold and white over the soaked fields, Naomi stood beside him with a rifle in her hands, a smile on her lips, and her braid tied with red ribbon. Delia Crocker never spoke of her again. Her brother sent one letter, unread and returned. The town forgot her in the way it forgets women who don't ask for pity. But Talon never did. And Naomi never forgot the way he lit the fire higher, not just in the hearth, but in her chest. The way he had come for her when the world turned away. So when people years later asked how she came to marry the quiet Apache in the hills, she'd only smile and say, "He didn't ask me why I was crying. He just built the fire higher. And I knew right then I'd found my forever." And if they listened a little longer, she'd say, softer still, "Sometimes, the name you carry all your life isn't the one that saves you. Sometimes, it's the name he says when no one's listening." Then she'd walk back into the cabin, and close the door that had never once been locked since.